This is CRM Audio, the Dynamics 365 podcast. This episode is sponsored by Ingenious. Ingenious Connector Enterprise integrates your telephone system into Microsoft Dynamics 365 and CRM for increased phone agent productivity. Features like screen pop, click to dial, and call logging enable efficient customer service and a comprehensive view of caller interactions. We thank Ingenious for sponsoring CRM Audio, the Dynamics 365 podcast. Okay. So, George, I wanted to ask you about a couple tips of the day. We'll talk about a couple of them. The first one I want to ask you about is tip 1107. Do not extend system users. Don't extend the user entity. I was curious about that because in this tip, you contradicted CRM tip of the day number 9. Way back, number 9, we suggested extending the user entity to make it a user adoption dashboard, because the user entity is related to all these entities with user owner records. You can put subgrids on the user form to easily show this is current recent opportunities, this is recent cases. Really handy to see in the context of the user. So, since you contradicted us, George, help me resolve this.
Okay, so you're talking about the tip 9, and I didn't know better back then, so I didn't say anything. And tip 9, just for the listeners out there, that was written by Joel, so Joel is definitely very upset about me contradicting him, as I usually do. Look, the 1107, let's put tip 9 aside just for a little bit. So 1107 came up as a direct result of a challenge that we faced when migrating from on-premises to online.
Okay.
Right? On-premise system had a very extensive user kind of management facility, and user entity was extended. It included something like regional teams. Has nothing to do with Dynamics 365 teams. It's more with the business process management thing. It's not a security kind of concept. It's more management concept. So there was a concept of this regional teams, that there was a rate, there was some KPIs in there. There was something else. Anyway, user entity was extended, and we found that, the problem that we faced is that users were coming and go, right? So they were coming and going all the time. So we had a system where we had dozens of users who were deactivated. And on premises, It's not a big deal, because if you're moving from A to B on premises, you can, reactivate the user, update the record, and be done with it, right? When you move into online, you can recreate the user. So effectively, what you do, you have to grant users the licenses, wait until the user propagates to Dynamics 365, then remove licenses from these users, and users become deactivated or disabled. Sorry, user entity is not active, inactive, it's enabled, disabled. So users become disabled. So what business wanted to do, they wanted to preserve those user records because they wanted to preserve the ownership, the historical ownership of the records, and so on. So we needed those user records. We didn't want just, assign all the records to some dummy user and be done with it. So we wanted those historical records because there were timesheets linked to that and things like that. So I needed those records. Now, the challenge is that those records contained some additional data, like, KPI, some of the KPIs, or, hourly rate of the user, or the default team they belong to, the business team. And turns out, I can't update those, right? So I simply can't update because these records are disabled. So yes, I can probably re-enable them and update them and then disable them, but it becomes a really, really tedious process.
But wait, you're saying you can't update them. Of course, you can't open up the user record and type in the field, but you should still be able to update those records through a data import or I've even updated user records because we got, for example, on our users that are billable resources, we've got an end billable date, so we know that when to stop including them in utilization reports. And I've had the case where the user gets deactivated. I built a view and updated it with the immersive Excel, or export it and re-import it, so you still can update those records, not through the front end.
Well, that's I admit that's news to me. So usually you can't update inactive records. Are you saying?
And let me just give you another scenario of sometimes why extending the user entity is convenient, and that's because, let's say your example. You have
no. Before we dive there, look, I'm more than happy to retract if. I'm just logging into one of the systems online.
Yeah.
And you're saying that disabled user, right, is different from inactive record.
Well, because you can't update inactive opportunities can be updated through a data update.
What do you mean by data update?
A data update. Like if you have a view of records in immersive Excel, you open in Excel online, and you update those records and save to CRM, it will update those records.
I'm happy to be wrong on that, but let me see. So I'm going to settings, and I'm going to, I presume, security, and I'm going to users. And let's say I want to take a look at disabled users. Look, I'm more than happy to be wrong on that. I just assume that, well, disabled user is disabled user,
So while you're testing that, let me give you a scenario. First of all, I don't think you directly contradict number 9, because number 9 wasn't talking about adding fields that you're updating. It was talking about extending the form with views and subgrids, and that's not really adding fields. But the exact scenario you mentioned with the rate, for example, one of the reasons people will put data like that on is that if they need either a report or to get the data out into a view that contains that data. So for example, say you have billable time entries, and you have a rate field, you have a rate value that this resource costs us this amount. If you put it on that record, on the user record, I can build a view that gives me the time entry, the owning user, and other fields from the user record. Where if it's a child entity and I need to get one view to support like an SSRS report or a chart of some kind, if it's a layer deeper because of the limitations with fetch and the layers you can put inside of a view, that's where it becomes a problem, and what motivates a lot of people to extend the user record. I agree that if it's just other ancillary data, there's probably value in putting it on another form.
Right. I go there, select disabled users, and there is no edit button whatsoever. However, there is a button to export to Excel. What I'm experiencing right now is that when I do that, Excel appears, but then there is some dialog that appears and never completes loading. So I'm refreshing the screen. I am getting Excel online, and I am getting editable fields. I'll be damned. So that didn't even occur to me to use Excel as a workaround. So I'm going to change the main phone number. And see, so I'll get 1234 as a phone number, and then save changes to Dynamics. Is that the one that you want to see, right? So what it does, Excel submits the data import effectively. So it's not so much Excel as the data import facility.
Right.
So after a while, I should be able to see the user record changing. And I'll be damned, the phone number changed. So, I'm trying to kind of express it without humiliating myself completely. So,
No, I wasn't setting out to say.
No.
That
I'm saying, look, let's have
there's
discussion of
reasons to
valuable
fields.
Yeah. Of value of extending and what challenges are there. So obviously the challenge is there. What I did as a true developer, I completely missed the Excel Online editing capabilities and bulk data input stuff. So we were looking to update the records, just in UI, and it wasn't possible, and I wrongly assumed because they are disabled, I wrongly assumed that we can't even update them. So that's definitely not the case, and looks like disabled users are not the same as inactive records. So
you could do the same thing with inactive accounts and inactive opportunities. I'm serious. I've updated inactive opportunities.
No. I'm not disputing that you can do it. But if you're trying to update an active record via API, most likely you will get an error that the record is inactive. So you're saying either some exempt of this or import process re-enables the record and then disables it back.
I'm not sure what happens. I'm just saying I know it works for.
Okay, look, more investigation is due. Let's talk about. So I admit, look, it does work. So happy that it works. The editing through Excel. So bulk edit is not available, and you can't edit individual records, but looks like you can definitely do it through Excel. So data import does allow you to update those records, which is good, which is workaround for most of those challenges that I faced. Still the question if API would allow you to do it directly, or you have to flip the flag, update, and then flip the flag back. It's for investigation, but let's talk about the value of extending the user record itself.
Sure. So here's the biggest reason I've seen, and that is that the user record is tied to everything as the owner field. Okay, so if you need to have fields that are used for reporting purposes in Excel, SSRS, charts, views, etc., such as an hourly rate. So let's say I have a timesheet record and there's an hourly rate associated with the user. If it's on the user record, I can add those fields to the view of the time entries to have the rate that then can be included in the XML in the fetch XML for my SSRS report or in my chart. Whereas if it's a child entity of the user, the limitations in fetch XML make it difficult or impossible to get those fields into it. So that's the biggest reason I see people adding those fields to the actual user record is I need to get them in a view with some other records in context of the user.
I hear you about making child records as extension of the user facility, and you're saying I can't get to those records. But we did have a few tips how to create a true one-to-one relationship, right? So in addition to the one-to-many relationship to this extended user record, let's call it that, I'd say why not to create a reverse one, which is many to one, and you'll have this extended record owning the user record, sort of being a parent of the user record, or in other sense, so effectively you'll have many to one. And that problem is solved because you always navigate to parent field in that scenario. Why that wouldn't work?
Well, I mean, even if it's the parent of the user, if you're starting from the time entry or opportunity and then adding fields from the related user, then you can't go another level.
Sure, you can. In what scenario you can't go to the parent record?
You can go to the so you're saying that would be the parent of the time entry in that case. So in the case,
of the user.
Right, but you're not doing a view of users. You're doing a view of.
But you can always. I'm thinking. Look, sorry. That's why I'm saying what scenario, because I'm thinking of fetch XML. In fetch XML, I can join entities and I can have the join to the parent.
Yeah, and you
pull up
can
the fields.
Right, but you can, but without doing fetch XML surgery. If you want people who are just using advanced find to do it, there's limitations there.
Why would I want people poking around, hourly rates of users? But no, I hear you. So you're saying that, if your objective.
Let me give you another scenario that we've done, in that you want a kind of a user profile, not like an employee profile. Maybe you want what training classes they've attended, or other things like that. In that case, I'm a big fan of separating that to another record, because the user record is really a settings type of entity. And when you try and make that kind of the directory record with the full, all these related things, it gets very busy and complicated. And so I do agree in spirit with that. The only thing I would say is, if you though want to have that dashboard, you use it as kind of a dashboard record where I can't on CRM dashboards impersonate a user, say I want to see what this dashboard looks like as George, but I can take George's user record and have a grid of all the opportunities you own and all the cases you own and all the whatever you own in one screen. That's where it's useful. But the difference I see there is we're not adding a bunch of fields. We're just showing subgrids of existing relationship records.
Yeah. Look, definitely related. It's related to a specific business scenario. So I can see advantages of the approaches that where you have the fields directly on the system user entity. To me, one of the challenges of extending system user directly is that there is no direct way to correlate the records between the old system and the new system unless you've taken special care of that. So because system user is one of those entities where you don't have control over the record creation process. So for example, if I'm migrating accounts from system A to system B, I can say, please recreate accounts, including their GUIDs. So I can recreate unique identifiers in the new system. That makes linking things significantly easier to do on the coding level, right? Because I know that if a record is related in A, it will be in B with the same ID. So lookup values don't change. Like literal values don't change in lookups.
Well, I think one thing.
But with the users, I don't have control of those GUIDs. So that's why I put up that tip without thinking that there is a joyful way to do things and break things.
Well, here's one thing that does make that easier, and that is the on-premise to online migrations I'm doing now. Almost all of them, I'm using the Microsoft Online Migration Service through Azure Lifecycle Services, and when you do that, the GUIDs and the lookups remain the same. It's the same thing as if you moved your on-premises environment from one server to another.
Well, lucky you that you have environments where you have more than 250 users, because
we've got it approved for people with less than 250 users.
249?
You have to go through an approval process, but if you got 5 users, it's not. They might not be.
That's. I know. I've heard the cases where 50 users get approved, and it's definitely the way to go. So if you move in that. In this instance, unfortunately, that's a small system, so it's. But
that brings up another common scenario. Not when you're moving from on-premises to online, but you're moving from Salesforce to Dynamics Online, or you're moving from Sales Logics, and you need to keep the old identifier for the user in the old system for migration purposes. A lot of times will just put a field on the user record and say legacy ID and put their old ID, and that way when you do matching for migrations, you can match that.
Yeah, so you put something like a text field.
Yeah.
I wonder if it makes sense to create a new entity called old users, right? Custom entity. Then recreate all the old user records in that entity with the GUIDs from the old system user, and then link that entity to the new system user table. and see if that may work. So you kind of extend, and then you can continuously move data across without using Excel. So to me, the challenge is, can we do it through the Kingsway Soft tool?
Well, let me tell you another.
Who is one of our sponsors? So if you didn't
exactly.
know, then that was the challenge, that we're moving records across. System users are not being moved across by using Kingsway Soft. So we didn't even create a transformation for system users. So I wonder if we can add one in and then move the fields across. So
let me tell you another Joel trick for disabled users that a lot of people don't know. You probably know this, but a lot of people assume, because Bob worked for me for 5 years, he's gone. I've deleted his Active Directory record. He's a disabled user.
Did you tell Bob? Because I don't think he knows that.
Anyway, but they assume that somebody has to be an active user to own records in Dynamics. And so we're moving, and they say, well, Bob's no longer here. A lot of people don't know, but you can create Bob. And let's say you have Active Directory Federation, you can create a stub user in Active Directory Azure AD without having it federated with your local and on Microsoft.com account. Temporarily give Bob a license. While he's enabled, give him a role, and then remove his license so he's a disabled user. And then you can load records in and assign them to him, have him be an activity party, even though he's a disabled user. So, one thing people don't know is I don't have to, choose between buying a license for somebody that's no longer here or setting up the generic legacy user. I can temporarily add people, give them roles, and remove their licenses.
Correct.
And then
that's exactly.
Assign records.
Yeah. I hear you. That's what we've done, and that's why I faced the whole problem of modifying some fields on the disabled user records. How we ended up with those disabled users in the first place is that we granted them licenses, so they did appear in Dynamics, and then we removed those licenses. We added them to roles, and then we removed those licenses. So we ended up with disabled users with the roles, and we were able to assign records, and during the migration process, nothing changes. So you just move across the records, preserve the ownership, and things like that. So that worked extremely well. I hear you. The challenge is that obviously, turns out the challenge is the lack of understanding how disabled users work in the first place on my behalf. But I wonder that the API is not supposed to work full on. So I wonder if there is a trickery. So from your experience, if you have disabled records, which disabled records you can modify through the data import?
I haven't found one I can't yet. Every time I've run in a scenario where I need to, I give it a try, and it always works.
So data import does work on disabled records. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and workflows. Workflows can update disabled users records too, like you
said. I hear you. So what happens to opportunity when you update closed opportunity? Did you notice that the closing date changes? Or
no, the closing date, and that's one of the reasons why I've had to do it. You run an import, and then you have it change the status. That makes the actual close date be today. So then, what I've done is then exported that to Excel, updated that to the date it was in the old system, and re-imported that. And that's not the same as reopening, reclosing. It doesn't create another opportunity to close activity, and it doesn't make the date today. It really appears to be just updating the close.
So
record.
This is what I think we should do. I'll do the full investigation as far as record update through the API is concerned. Right? We take your word for it. So data import can update disabled records or inactive records and disabled users. And I'll do the trial and error investigation on the API side of things, and then we'll do another tip of the day.
So you had another tip you wanted to talk about, one of the more recent ones. What was that?
Look, it's coming up. I think by the time we published this
it'll be up by the
podcast,
time
it
you're
will be up
published as
there. The one of the things that I did want to talk about is that some misconceptions around permissions. That there was a question on Facebook where people said, "Hey, look, I've got this user A, and this user A is not admin. How can I give this user ability to promote themselves to admin?" So because when they push the promote to admin button, they get an error message saying you can't do that, you don't have the privilege. So people said, well, can I do that? And most of the people said, no, you can't do that. But then there was an answer saying, yes, you can do it. I've done it multiple times before, and it's possible to do it via workflow or plugin, because both workflow and plugin allows you to elevate permissions during the execution. So, and indeed, let's say plugin, workflow. Let's say workflow, you can publish the workflow that can, add user to sysadmin role. It is possible. Workflow will run under the context of the publisher. Let's say asynchronous workflow, so it will run in the context of a publishing user, which could be admin. And yes, so you can create a button, you can create a workflow, and users say, run this workflow, and this workflow will elevate them to sysadmins. So when people say, yes, it is possible. However, what people miss is that there's still no permission elevation is taking place. So let me explain that. So permission elevation is when user can grant themselves a permission that has a wider scope than what they possess currently.
Okay.
So in the simple terms is ability to elevate yourself to a sysadmin.
Yeah, the general rule is you can only assign roles that you already have unless you're system admin, right?
Yeah. So it's basically not so much assign roles as go down to granular level. You can't extend your scope of your permissions beyond that you already have. Sysadmins can do it for other users, but not users themselves. I felt that there is a misconception. People believe that users can elevate permissions themselves, and creating this workflow is effectively giving users the ability to elevate permissions.
Why would you want users to do this?
That's this aside. I don't want to get into this debate
because if you did that, you may as well just give them system admin to begin
correct,
with, right?
So first of all, you don't want to do that. Second is, there's still no permission elevation is taking place, because when you create a workflow, permission elevation is taking place, but these permissions are granted not by the user to themselves, but by the system admin when they created this workflow. So effectively, it's kind of delayed permission elevation, but it's done by the system admin nevertheless when they created this workflow, right? So it may create an illusion that users grant themselves sysadmin. Effectively, they don't do that. It's a person who created workflow.
That this workflow runs as, right?
Correct. That user grants them permissions. What's even interesting is that, let's say you are sysadmin today. You create this workflow, right? And you publish it. But then someone takes away this sysadmin privileges from you. And guess what? This workflow will fail in the future because it will run under a context. So effectively, it will elevate permissions, but as you, not as a user themselves. So
right.
The bottom line is that in any secure system, and Dynamics 365 is indeed secure as it can be for the business application, for the software as a service. Elevation of permission is the biggest no-no because it's a security gap, and if it's discovered, it needs to be closed as soon as possible. So because otherwise your permissions don't make any sense. If I can elevate my permissions, that's it. The entire system is at my disposal regardless what role I have. So it's exceptionally important not to have permission elevation vulnerabilities in your system. And at this point in time, as far as we know, Dynamics 365 doesn't have this vulnerability. So it's not possible as a user, it's not possible to elevate your permissions beyond to what you already have.
Right. Now, here's one thing I learned from a customer's mistake. If you do give a team system admin permissions, they can't do everything system admins do, but there are a lot of things they can do if the team has that permission. And it is possible for them to add themselves to that team.
Okay. So users themselves can add themselves to the team that has the sysadmin privileges. Is that it?
Yeah.
Even though they don't have sysadmin privileges themselves.
Right. If they have rights to add themselves to the team.
But again,
it's not full sysadmin, but there are certain things around customization that will give them the rights.
But again, the very fact that team is assigned sysadmin privileges, so something needs to be done by the sysadmin.
Right.
This assignment of the system admin privileges to the team is the act of sysadmin. So someone needed to do boo-boo, beforehand.
Right. So it's not going to. You're not going to find yourself in a scenario where it just spontaneous combustion, spontaneous elevation of roles.
Correct. Yeah. So bottom line is
you have to mean to do that.
Correct. Yeah. You need assistance to do that. So at some point in time, there needs to be someone who's got the privileges wider than what the intent is, and someone with these wider permissions need to then create a backdoor for you to elevate yourself to that set of permissions.
So if you want a backdoor in your house, you're going to have to install it yourself.
No, you have to ask a certified installer to do it for you. And then you can use this backdoor. Yeah, that's the bottom line. Okay, so that's enough about permission elevation, I suppose.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, George.
Great, thank you.
This has been CRM Audio, the Dynamics 365 podcast. Send us your feedback at voice@crm.audio. Check out our other shows at crm.audio or subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and any place else podcasts are offered. This podcast is a production of Dynamics Podcast, LLC.